Educational Communications and this station present Environmental Directions with Nancy Pearlman. On this series, we explore the effects of human influence on the Earth's ecosystems and discuss solutions to environmental problems which affect the quality of life on this planet. Environmental Directions gives you the kind of information you need to help you participate in decisions impacting your community, the nation, and the world. Now, here's your host, Nancy Pearlman.
Hello. My guest is Nathan Wolfstein. He is chair of the COPE Preparedness Advisory Committee, chair of Bobcat Volunteer Emergency Command, coordinator with Be More Prepared, Inc., member of the White Cross of Trained Volunteers, and a leader of Eagle Scout Parents. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Nancy.
You have been involved in trying to have communities be ready for emergencies and disasters. Your organizations have focused on earthquakes and wildfires and now COVID. But is being prepared the same regardless of what the disaster may be? We're supposed to have all our emergency kit ready in case there is such a problem?
That's a very good question. When we deal with the concept of a whole community emergency or disaster versus isolated emergencies, the answer is yes. The biggest problem is no major emergency or disaster like that is ever the same. In our organization, we employ the policy of rigid flexibility. So once we know what we're responding to and what we're going to be dealing with, then we can actually make what we would call emergency command decisions. And just so you understand, everything that we do as an independent private sector company and network, we are able to deploy and activate and open up resources and start responding at the first hours of following this actual disaster. But the minute that the city forms its incident command, whether it's through the fire department or the police department, we then become part of that command and under their decision-making process.
It's obvious that when many agencies are involved and community organizations are involved in trying to help people in need, that there needs to be a centralized coordination. And here in the United States, I think we've often thought that, well, there are resources that can come in and help out. But the bigger the problem, the more we find out that that may not be the case. What do we do as citizens, as individuals, to be ready, aside from having our emergency kit to immediately evacuate, knowing where we can take our pets and our animals, having our health program documented so people know what to do if we're injured? What else do we have to have in that emergency kit?
Before we get to the emergency kit, I think a major thing to realize is preparedness is awareness. So I think as a person, we need to know what are some of the risks, and if that happens, what are some of the things I need to prepare for? So you prepare differently for a wildfire than for a flood, and like we've been doing to prepare not to continue the COVID spread, these are all over time we have to do that, but we're talking about in those first minutes. So the standard things of a first aid kit, having enough, maybe some water or some portable food or candy or things that you can pick up and take with you. Our network of volunteer emergency communications, we call VCOM, is made up of primarily ham radio operators, independent, trained emergency communication people. The first thing we do is assume the phones will go out. So we have created a network of ham radio operators in order so that we can communicate and align to our emergency management departments here in the city of Los Angeles, so we can find out as quickly as anyone can find out, I think, what is the disaster we're going to be dealing with. And then we set up how the best way to deal with it is based on, are the roads open? Is there too much smoke? All the other obvious kinds of things where we can't get it from point A to point B.
I think that people are starting to rely too much on technology, not realizing that the electricity will go out, therefore the computers may not be able to operate. The cell phone towers may be destroyed, and therefore they may not be a resource to call for help. And I know that as someone who hikes in wild areas, in natural areas, on trails, that you don't always have a reception in the mountains with your cell phone. telephone if you're injured and need help. And so we have to know our own first aid. We have to know our own way to get help and get out of a particular location. Know alternatives if you're in a city with a fire, if a road's going to be closed or not. But that kind of information isn't too generally available to people, or they don't take the time to learn what the options are. I know that when I go traveling and I go to a hotel, first thing I do is read that map on the hotel door saying, where is the exit? Because if there's smoke, I may not be able to find it. I have to know automatically which way to crawl.
Yes, I think that's a very important point, Nancy. That's the biggest area that we have been able to make the most productive is in what we call pre. We teach and help people with the preparedness, PRE. We pre-position supplies. So we have a number of VPOD units, volunteer emergency points of distribution, are filled with basically the basic necessities: water, first aid, food, power, communication devices, all of these kind of things, so that in the first minutes and the first hours, we can open up and start handing out to people who need it, or setting up a secure evacuation environment for people to come to, with what do we have for them when they get there, whether it be a cot, a blanket, hot coffee, candy, all the kind of things that make a difference in those first hours when we don't know what's going to happen and we're in that initial period. And then under our model of donations management, we prepay all of that. So the whole concept that we've done is we take not monetary donations, but a large amount of different types of products and process that, and then put it out into numbers of different locations, so that when people come, we don't have to say to them, here's how much it is for a cup of coffee. We just say, here's a cup of coffee and come back when you want more. That was a big problem when we started 12 years ago.
There are really two aspects to an emergency, to dealing with natural disasters, and that is immediately protecting ourselves, whether or not it's the earthquake, a fire, a flood. But then there's the longer-term needs that have to be considered. And I know that I was collecting donated items to send over to an orphanage in Kenya, East Africa, but then I found out after the Paradise Fire, they needed donations, and someone drove down and loaded up the van load of clothes that is needed here in the United States. Is it hard to get the necessary donations from companies and individuals?
Yeah, it's hard to have a definite answer on that. If you're looking for products that are in limited supply or greatly needed, like N95 sterile operation suite masks, then nobody's donating those. There's not enough to go around. The bottom line of how I can best answer that is in our management system of donations, about 20% of what we get donated can actually be used for the disaster response and relief. So 80% of it may or may not, or doesn't have any relevance, or we can't keep it because it's pallets of potato chips. We can't keep things that aren't going to last for a long period of time or will make somebody potentially ill. So we have set up a whole system pretty much along the West Coast to where we have nonprofits, food banks, faith-based organizations, alumni groups that we barter and trade with. So we take a pallet of this or 6 pallets of that they need, and we put out on a wish list thing saying, we need blankets, we need utensils, we need cups, we need sheets, we need this. And then when they get that, they say, okay, I got it, we're sending it over on the next pickup or delivery.
And your wish list is on your website?
Well, the wish list constantly changes. So depending, when we have these mobile units and VPOD container units, about 60% of what goes into it is standard. 40%, we have a whole program we call individualized. So take an independent community, an unincorporated community out in the Antelope Valley like Pear Blossom and Little Rock. What they need in a rural environment is different than we need in an urban environment.
But you have a lot of useful information at atasteofpreparedness.com.
Yeah, that's our consolidated website. The one thing that we really wanted to stress is all the planning, all the projections are great, but let's deal on what actually happened. Let's deal on what we can do better. One of the main motivators for the city, the county, and the state, when we all began working on this over 10 years ago, maybe 12, was to prevent the second disaster, the disaster after the disaster, which everyone dealt with, because the minute there was a wildfire, a flood, a gas, people started bringing stuff and donating. Well, this caused tremendous problems because they brought a whole lot of stuff we didn't need, and then we had to manage, and then it rained, and then it was this, and it got food bad. So our model prevents that.
You learned from previous mistakes and problems.
Well, we didn't make that mistake. We came up with the solution, which was let there never be a second disaster.
Again, coordination is so important so that any donation can go to where it's needed. You're involved in helping people with disasters. What's the difference between a disaster and emergency? To me, a disaster is an emergency.
No, it's the other way around. The difference is an emergency is an isolated incident. A car crash, 3 cars are involved, 2 people hurt, 4 people standing by, or a gas leak on Ventura Boulevard. A disaster is hundreds or thousands of emergencies at the same time.
How does a profit-making company like yours work with nonprofit organizations as well as governmental agencies in these disasters?
Many years ago, we came across the concept called public-private sector partnerships, and I would say over the years, we have figured out, with at least the way we do it in our model, how to get the best of the public sector and the best of the private sector, because there's things the public sector can do that we can't do, and there are things, for instance, with Chief Terrazas from the fire department, the issue is I can open up and start handing out water before he would ever be able to deal with that. He has other priorities. He does this, and this department has to do that, and then they have to requisition it, and then they have to do this, and who authorized it, and by then we've already given 100 people food and water.
I want to thank you so very much for being there if and when we do need your help. Thank you for reminding us of what to do in emergencies and disasters. Thank you for being my guest.
And thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it.
I have been speaking with Nathan Wolfstein, who is the coordinator for Be More Prepared, Inc. He is chair of Bobcat Volunteer Emergency Command and chair of COPE Preparedness Advisory Committee. I'm Nancy Perlman. Thank you very much for joining us, and do tune in again next week.
If you would like free information about these environmental issues, go to www.ecoprojects.org or call 310-559-9160. Environmental Directions with your host, Nancy Perlman, is a community affairs program of the nonprofit organization Educational Communications and this station.